The stasis field flickered, and 90 students stopped breathing at the same second. I felt the change in the air before I understood it. One moment, Professor Ithkal was talking about chromatophore patterns on the projector screen, and the next moment, the containment platform behind him let out a low hum, the kind of hum a machine makes right before it fails. The blue light around the creature on the platform blinked once, twice, then steadied again, but that one blink was enough. The thing on the platform was called a Vresh lurker. I had read about them the week before, in a file I almost skipped because I thought it was exaggerated. 4 meters long, built low and wide, with 6 limbs that ended in curved plates sharp enough to cut through hull metal. Its skin shifted color to match whatever was behind it, so most of the reports about it began with the words, "By the time anyone saw it, it was already too late." Vresh space had been sealed off for 200 years. Nobody in the room had ever seen one outside of a photograph. Now there was one lying 8 feet from the front row, its single wide eye slowly opening. I want to tell you I reacted like a hero. I did not. I reacted like someone watching a very large dog wake up in the wrong room. My first thought was not fear. It was something closer to disbelief, followed almost immediately by a laugh that came out before I could stop it. Nobody else laughed. 90 heads turned toward me instead of the creature. A Sizaxi student 2 rows down had gone completely still, her long neck frozen mid-turn. A Patoran boy near the window had flattened himself so low in his seat that only his eyes showed above the desk. Even the professor, a tall gray being with 4 arms and a voice that usually carried perfect calm, had stopped talking entirely, one hand raised in the air, as if he had forgotten what he was about to say. "Human," Professor Ithkal said, his translator crackling on the word. "Explain your reaction." I felt every eye in the room land on me, and for a second, I almost laughed again, because the question felt so strange, next to the fact that a 4-ton predator was twitching awake 15 feet away, and somehow, I was the one being questioned. "It's twitching," I said, standing up slowly. "Your stasis field just hiccuped on the scariest thing any of you have ever heard of, and everyone in this room is doing the math on how many of us it can reach before someone hits the alarm. I'm the only one doing different math." A Belnari student near the door, the one who always kept all 4 of her eyes moving around the room, finally looked away from the exits and stared straight at me. "What math is that?" "There are 91 of us and 1 of it," I said. "Even if the field drops completely right now, that's a very bad 5 seconds for maybe the front row, and then the rest of us are still standing here. It's not the 91 of us who should be afraid, it's the 1 of it." The silence in the room changed shape. It was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes right before people start thinking instead of freezing. The Vresh lurker's eye rolled toward me, slow and heavy, like it was trying to decide if I mattered. I didn't move. I didn't feel brave standing there. I felt like I was watching a nature documentary from the wrong side of the screen, and some old part of my brain, the part that grew up hearing stories about wolves and bears and things bigger than us, was quietly telling me that being big was never the same as being safe. "You are suggesting," Professor Ithkal said carefully, "that a creature capable of ending a dozen lives in seconds is something to laugh at." "I'm suggesting fear should tell you what to do," I said. "Right now, everyone's fear is telling them to freeze. Mine is telling me to count exits and count seats and figure out how fast the stasis field resets if it drops again. Which, by the way, Professor, might be something you want to check, because that flicker did not look like a scheduled test to me." That got him moving. He turned to the control panel built into the lecture platform, tapping through screens with 2 of his 4 hands, while the other 2 stayed raised toward the class in a gesture I had learned meant, "Stay calm," though nobody in the room looked calm at all. A girl named Lena, sitting near me, grabbed my sleeve. She was Sizaxi, thin-limbed, with pale green skin and eyes set wide on either side of her head, built by evolution to watch for danger from 2 directions at once. Her voice came out, barely above a whisper. "You are not afraid," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am afraid," I said, because it was true. "I'm just not frozen. Those are different things." She stared at me like I had said something impossible in a language she almost understood. The panel beeped, and Professor Ithkal let out a long breath through his side vents. The field held. It was a diagnostic cycle. Scheduled. I forgot to mention it before the demonstration began. He said this last part quietly, like a man realizing he had almost caused something much worse than an interesting lecture. A few students laughed then, short and shaky, more relief than humor, but not the deep kind of laugh I'd let out earlier. Theirs was the sound of people climbing down from a ledge. Mine had been the sound of someone who never thought he was on the ledge in the first place. "Sit down, please," the professor said to me, and I did, though I noticed his eyes stayed on me a moment longer than they needed to. The lecture tried to continue after that, but nobody was really listening to the slides about chromatophore density anymore. I could feel people glancing back at me every few minutes, the way you glance at something you thought you understood, and suddenly don't. After class ended, Lena caught up with me in the hallway outside the lecture hall. The hallway was long and curved, lined with windows looking out over the training campus, ships landing and leaving in slow, orderly lines against a dark purple sky. "Can I ask you something?" she said, walking half a step behind me, her long neck angled so both eyes could watch me at once. "Sure. When the field flickered, what did you actually see? Because I saw something that could kill 10 of us before the professor finished a sentence." "What did you see?" I thought about it for a moment, because it was a fair question, and I wanted to give her a real answer instead of a clever one. "I saw one animal," I said. "Big, dangerous, sure, but one. On my planet, the things that actually hurt us most were never the biggest ones. They were small, fast, and organized. A single wolf will run from a group of people carrying torches. A single bear usually wants nothing to do with a crowd making noise. We learned a long time ago that numbers change everything, even against something much stronger than any one of us. But the lurker is not a wolf," she said. "It is faster than any human, stronger. It could reach the first 3 rows before anyone stood up." "Maybe," I said. "But it can't reach all 91 of us at once, and it knows that. Predators don't attack groups that outnumber them unless they're desperate or trapped. That thing was neither. It was groggy, contained, and outnumbered 30 to 1. The scariest part of that room today wasn't the lurker. It was that everyone forgot to count." Lena walked quietly beside me for a while, her steps light and careful, the way her whole species seemed to move, always ready to change direction. Finally she asked the question I think she had been building up to the entire walk. "Are all humans like you?" I laughed again, softer this time. "No, some of us panic just as fast as anyone else, but most of us grew up being told stories about facing things bigger than ourselves and winning anyway, not through strength, but through thinking clearly when everyone else stops thinking at all. It gets built into you, even if you never notice it happening." She didn't say anything else for a moment, just looked at me the way someone looks at a puzzle they're slowly starting to solve. We reached the end of the hallway, where it opened into the main courtyard, students from a dozen species crossing in every direction under the wide purple sky. Somewhere above us, a transport ship lifted off with a low, steady roar, climbing until it became a small point of light and disappeared. "I used to think humans were dangerous because of what you could do," Lena said finally. "Now I think you're dangerous because of how you think when something goes wrong." "That's probably fair," I said. "It's not a compliment," she said, though her tone suggested it might have been one anyway. I smiled and didn't answer that, because some things are better left as they are. We walked the rest of the way across the courtyard together, past the fountain, past a group of Kethrin floating lazily in their travel tanks, past the training hall where next week's lecture would apparently include something called a threat climber, which I had already decided to read about early, just in case the stasis field decided to flicker again. Somewhere behind us, in a secured lab, the Vresh lurker was already being moved back into deeper containment, its single eye closing again as the sedatives took hold. For the rest of the campus, it would become a story, retold and changed a dozen times over the following weeks, growing bigger and stranger with every telling. But for me, it would always be simple. It was one creature in a room full of people who had forgotten, just for a moment, that they were the room full of people. I hadn't forgotten, and somewhere deep in the part of my brain built by 100,000 years of standing together against things bigger and faster and stronger, that was the only fact that had ever mattered.